I stood in Preston's office trying to process his words. Pack your things. Your position has been eliminated. The termination hit me like a physical shock, though I'd been expecting it for days. 1 week after Eleanor's funeral, and here I was being fired. The timing wasn't coincidental. I kept my expression perfectly neutral despite the storm raging inside. I understand. We'll need all client information transferred immediately, he continued, sliding a folder across his desk. Especially any contacts you've been handling directly. I nodded, accepting the folder without opening it. Of course. And he added, leaning forward with poorly concealed urgency. We'll need details about the West Coast accounts. Eleanor mentioned them before her unfortunate passing. That's when I knew they had no idea she'd officially transferred the entire $1.2 million portfolio to me 3 days before her heart attack. No idea I'd already quietly resigned via certified mail that morning. I'll gather everything, I promised with a pleasant smile. Preston seemed almost disappointed by my calm reaction. He'd expected tears, perhaps begging. Instead, he got professionalism that clearly unsettled him. You have until the end of the day, he said, dismissing me with a wave. I walked out of his office, past curious stares of colleagues who'd clearly been speculating about my closed-door meeting. Some looked away quickly, guilty about already knowing my fate. Others watched with barely concealed satisfaction, one less competitor on the corporate ladder. At my desk, I began methodically packing my few personal items into a small cardboard box the HR department had already provided. How considerate of them to have it ready. Clara from accounting approached, her voice lowered. Is it true they're letting you go? Apparently my position has been eliminated, I replied, carefully wrapping the small crystal paper weight Eleanor had given me for my 3-year anniversary with the company. That's ridiculous. You brought in that huge Coastal Solutions account just last month. I shrugged. Business decisions rarely make sense from the outside. What I didn't say. This was exactly what Eleanor had predicted, exactly what we had planned for that. 6 months earlier, Eleanor had called me into her office late one evening. Everyone else had gone home, leaving the floor quiet except for the distant hum of the cleaning crew's vacuum. Roland, she said as I entered, close the door. I did as instructed, settling into the chair across from her desk. Eleanor pushed aside her computer monitor and slid a glass of water toward me. I've been watching you outperform everyone for 3 years, she said, her direct gaze as intense as ever. Yet they keep passing you over for promotion. I sipped the water silently. 5 years at the company, and despite bringing in more new business than anyone, I remained stuck while less qualified men climbed upward. The executive team has a particular vision, she continued, choosing her words carefully, and apparently we don't fit it, what she didn't say, but we both understood. The all-male leadership team maintained their positions through an intricate network of favoritism. My boss had hit the glass ceiling so hard she'd stopped trying to break through. I'm dying, she stated flatly. Cancer, 6 months, maybe less. I nearly choked on my water, setting the glass down with a shaking hand. When I'm gone, they'll carve up my client relationships like vultures. Unless, she outlined her plan. She would gradually introduce me to her most valuable clients, the West Coast portfolio worth $1.2 million in annual contracts. But officially, these meetings would appear as routine support work. They're watching the big accounts, she explained, not the scattered smaller ones that collectively matter most. For months, we worked together in plain sight. I met with creative entrepreneurs, boutique manufacturers, and innovative startups all along the coast. Eleanor introduced me as her right hand. The clients trusted her judgment. Meanwhile, at the office, the whispers began, spending an awful lot of time with Eleanor. One colleague remarked loudly as I passed the break room, probably fishing for that promotion. Another responded with a snort. My immediate supervisor, Preston, began requesting unusual reports, asking pointed questions about client meetings. I provided just enough information to satisfy without revealing our true activities. 2 weeks before she died, Eleanor finalized the paperwork. Legal transfer of client relationships, properly notarized. She even paid the transfer fees from her personal account. They'll come for you after I'm gone, she warned. Be ready. The day she died, I cried genuine tears. She'd become more than a mentor. But beneath my grief, her plan was already in motion. At her funeral, the executive team performed their sorrow beautifully. Preston placed his hand on my shoulder, his touch uncomfortable and unwelcome. "Such a loss," he said. "We, Unc. will need to discuss transitioning her account soon." I nodded, eyes downcast, whatever the company needs. That evening, I received a text from the CEO, "Meeting tomorrow, bring complete client list." I stayed up all night preparing 2 sets of documents. One included every client except those in the West Coast portfolio. The other was my resignation letter, effective immediately. With 2 weeks' notice, I wouldn't be required to work. The CEO glanced at my incomplete list during our morning meeting. "Where are the West Coast accounts?" "I'm not familiar with those," I said, expression neutral. "She handled them personally." His face tightened. "Search her files. We need those clients." For a week, I pretended to search while secretly meeting with my inherited clients. Every evening, Preston would demand updates. Every morning, I'd report finding nothing. The company grew desperate. The quarterly projections looked bleak without those accounts. The executive team huddled in closed-door meetings. Then came my termination. Preston barely contained his satisfaction, assuming I'd be devastated. Now, as I placed the last of my belongings in the box, Clara touched my arm. "What will you do now?" I smiled. "I have some ideas. My name is Roland Foster, and until today, I was a senior account manager at one of the most prestigious firms in the city. Not the most glamorous title, but I made it work. I'm 55, single by choice, and determined in ways that often made my colleagues uncomfortable. Growing up in a small coastal town taught me patience. Watching my mother run a small shop while raising 2 kids alone taught me resourcefulness. 4 years at State College on scholarships taught me perseverance. And 5 years at this company taught me that playing by the rules was a luxury reserved for those who made them." Eleanor recognized that in me from the beginning. While other executives saw a quiet worker who followed directions, she saw the calculations behind my eyes. The first time she called me into her office, I thought I was being reprimanded. Instead, she asked what I thought about a proposal the team had celebrated that morning. "It's fundamentally flawed," I said, surprised by my own honesty. Instead of being offended, she smiled. "Explain." I outlined 3 critical weaknesses in the proposal that everyone else had missed. When I finished, she nodded once. "Tomorrow, you'll join me in the client meeting. Say exactly what you just told me, but no buts. The client deserves honest expertise. That's what we're paid for that." The next day, the client thanked us for our candor and signed a larger contract than originally proposed, specifically requesting that I be involved in implementation. That was the beginning of our working relationship. Eleanor became my mentor. Though neither of us ever used that term, she pushed me, challenged me, and trusted me with increasingly important responsibilities. When I generated a 30% increase in my portfolio's revenue while others struggled to maintain their numbers, I expected recognition. Instead, Preston was promoted to team lead despite his mediocre performance. "You have to play their game," a female colleague advised. "Laugh at their jokes, join their happy hours, make them comfortable." I tried briefly. Spent evenings nursing drinks I didn't want, listening to stories that weren't funny, pretending to be interested in golf tournaments. I couldn't care less about that. It made no difference. When the next promotion went to Julian, who'd been with the company half as long as me, Farad called me into her office again. "Stop trying to be one of them," she said. "They've already decided who you are, which is a threat." I laughed. "I'm not threatening anyone. You outperform them consistently without playing their games. That's the most threatening thing you could do." She was right, of course. My results spoke for themselves, but numbers couldn't overcome the invisible barriers. I watched as male colleagues took credit for my ideas in meetings, interrupting me only to restate exactly what I just said to nods of approval. I endured clients addressing questions to junior male colleagues instead of me despite my seniority. And through it all, I kept breaking records, bringing in business, making the company money they happily accepted while denying me advancement. Eleanor understood. As the only female executive, she'd fought the same battles for decades. She'd reached a level of success that demanded respect, but never acceptance. I watched her navigate board meetings where her suggestions were ignored until a male colleague repeated them. I saw her excluded from golf outings where real decisions were made. Don't make my mistakes, she told me once. I waited for them to recognize my value. Don't wait. But I wasn't sure what the alternative was until the day she told me about her diagnosis. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, 6 months at best. She'd kept it secret from everyone except her doctor and now me. Why tell me? I asked, still processing the shock. Because I need your help, she replied. And because you deserve better than what they'll give you when I'm gone. Her plan was both simple and daring. The West Coast portfolio consisted of 23 clients she'd personally cultivated over 15 years. Small to mid-sized businesses that collectively generated $1.2 million in annual revenue, not the flashiest accounts that executives bragged about at quarterly meetings, but steady, loyal clients who valued personal attention. These relationships are built on trust, she explained. When I'm gone, the company will distribute them among the team leads who have no relationship with these clients. Half will leave within a year. What do you want me to do? I asked. I want you to inherit them. The next day began our careful choreography. Eleanor started introducing me to these clients as her trusted associate. We traveled to meetings together, her teaching me each client's history, preferences, and pain points to the company. It looked like she was finally delegating some of her workload due to health issues she'd vaguely mentioned. In reality, she was transferring her most valuable asset to me: client trust. Fiona from the boutique tech startup immediately liked me. Eleanor never brings anyone to our meetings. You must be special. Roland sees things others miss, Eleanor said simply. Victor, whose sustainable packaging company was growing rapidly, was more direct. Are you taking over for Eleanor? Just supporting for now, I replied, following our agreed script. Good. I hate repeating myself to new people. By the 3rd month, I knew every client's business almost as well as Eleanor did. By the 4th month, some were calling me directly instead of her that. By the 5th month, we were ready for the legal part. Everything must be documented properly, Eleanor insisted. They'll fight you otherwise. We met with her personal attorney, not the company's legal team. Papers were drawn up, signatures notarized, client permissions obtained. One by one, the accounts were officially transferred to me as the primary contact. The company remained oblivious, focused on larger accounts and quarterly projections. When Eleanor began coming to the office less frequently, citing medical appointments, no one questioned my increased client meetings. They assumed I was covering temporarily. Only Preston seemed suspicious, demanding increasingly detailed reports. The executive team needs visibility into these accounts, he insisted. I provided surface-level information, nothing that revealed the depth of my new relationships with these clients. Eleanor had warned me about him specifically. Preston has been trying to get his hands on my portfolio for years. She'd said he knows those clients represent security, stability. 2 weeks before her death, Eleanor invited me to her home. I'd never been there before and was surprised by its modest size and practical furnishings. No extravagance despite her executive salary. I live within my means, she explained, noticing my expression. Financial independence gives you options. Remember that. On her dining table lay the final documents. Official transfer of client relationships to me personally, not to the company, all properly executed. Is this even legal that? I asked, stunned by the comprehensiveness of the paperwork. Completely. I'm transferring relationships I built, not company property. The distinction matters. She slid the papers toward me. Keep these somewhere safe, away from your home and office. I arranged for a safety deposit box that afternoon. They'll come for you after I'm gone, she warned, her voice weaker than I'd ever heard it. Be ready. 3 days later, her assistant called me in tears. Eleanor had suffered a heart attack in her sleep. She was gone. The company's response was swift. A tasteful email announcement, a donation to cancer research in her name, a team meeting where the CEO spoke about her contributions before quickly pivoting to moving forward and maintaining client relationships during this transition. At her funeral, I stood apart from my colleagues, watching their performance of grief. The CEO gave a polished eulogy that somehow managed to make Eleanor's achievements sound like they belonged to the company. Preston approached me afterward, his expression sympathetic while his eyes remained cold. Such a loss, he said. We, need to discuss transitioning her account soon. I nodded, eyes downcast. Whatever the company needs. That evening came the CEO's text, demanding the complete client list. The next morning, I provided the incomplete version, omitting all 23 West Coast clients. "Where are the West Coast accounts?" he demanded, frowning at the list. "I'm not familiar with those." I lied smoothly. "She handled them personally." His face tightened. "Search her files. We need those clients." For the next week, I performed a thorough search of Eleanor's office, finding nothing because there was nothing to find. She'd been methodical in removing any trace of these particular client relationships. Meanwhile, I used my lunch breaks and evenings to meet with my new clients, reassuring them during this transition. Every single one expressed sadness at Eleanor's passing. Most added how relieved they were to still have me. "Continuity is everything in business," Matteo said during our coffee meeting. "If they'd assigned someone new, I would have walked." Each day, Preston grew more agitated. The quarterly forecast looked increasingly concerning without those accounts. The executive team held closed-door meetings that ended with grim expressions and hushed conversations that stopped when I walked by that. Then came my termination meeting, the culmination of their frustration and my preparation. As I carried my box of belongings toward the elevator, Preston approached one last time. "Before you go," he said, voice low and urgent, "where are those West Coast files? This isn't personal. It's business. The company needs those accounts." I sat down my box and looked him directly in the eyes. "I have no idea what you're talking about that. Don't play games, Roland. Those clients represent over $1 million in annual revenue. They belong to this company." I picked up my box again. "Actually, they belong to whoever they choose to work with." His face wrinkled. "Is that a threat? Just a fact?" I replied, stepping into the elevator. As the doors closed on his angry face, I allowed myself a small smile. The termination I'd been expecting had finally arrived. But unlike what Preston and the executive team believed, this wasn't the end of my story. It was only the beginning. The morning after my termination, I awoke before my alarm. The strange silence of not having to rush to the office settled around me like an unfamiliar blanket. For the first time in 5 years, I was unemployed. Technically, in reality, I was freer than I'd been in years. I made coffee and carried it to my small balcony, watching the city wake up. My phone buzzed with concerned messages from the few colleagues I'd been friendly with that. Clara had sent 3 texts already, each more worried than the last. I answered her briefly. "I'm fine, better than fine." The truth was, I'd been preparing for this day for months. The night before Eleanor's funeral, I'd opened a business checking account. 2 days later, I'd filed the paperwork for my new limited liability company. 3 weeks after that, I'd secured a small office space in a converted warehouse by the waterfront, walking distance from 5 of my new clients. All of this had been done quietly, methodically, following Eleanor's detailed instructions. "Don't rush," she'd advised. "Let them show their true colors first," and they had spectacularly. My phone rang, an unknown number. I hesitated before answering. Roland Foster speaking. "Mr. Foster, this is Winston Hughes, Chief Legal Counsel." "For I know who you are, Winston," I interrupted. We'd met at several company functions, though he'd never remembered my name. "Yes, well," he cleared his throat. "There seems to be some confusion regarding certain client relationships, formerly managed by Eleanor Vance. The company would like to schedule a meeting to clarify these matters." "There's no confusion on my part," I replied, sipping my coffee. "Perhaps I'm not being clear. These client relationships belong to the company. Any attempt to redirect them would constitute theft of proprietary business assets." I'd been expecting this. Eleanor had prepared me for it. "I have no intention of discussing this further without my attorney present," I said calmly. "Any additional communication should be directed to her office." I provided the contact information for Sylvia Rostova. The lawyer Eleanor had introduced me to that. "This could be resolved amicably," Winston said, his tone shifting to something almost friendly. "The company is prepared to offer you a consulting arrangement to facilitate the transition of these accounts." "Goodbye, Winston." I ended the call and blocked the number. 20 minutes later, my phone rang again, the CEO himself this time. I let it go to voicemail. His message was Turkena. "This is a serious matter. Call me immediately." Instead, I sent a text to Matteo. "Still on for our 10:00 at that NM meeting." His reply came seconds later. "Absolutely. Bringing the new product samples." I showered and dressed with care. choosing a sleek charcoal pantsuit that Eleanor had once admired. Power isn't about blending in, she'd told me. It's about standing your ground. The temporary office I'd leased wasn't fully furnished yet. Just a desk, 2 chairs, and a small conference table, but the view of the harbor made up for the Spartan interior. Matteo arrived precisely at 10, carrying a box of prototype packaging. "Nice place," he said, glancing around. "Bit empty though for now," I replied. "I'm starting small." Matteo set his samples on the conference table. "Got a call from your old company this morning. Some guy named Preston." My pulse quickened. What did he want? To schedule an urgent meeting about our account, said there'd been a worse structuring and he'd be taking over. Matteo shrugged. I told him we're happy with our current arrangement. And what did he say to that? He said there must be some misunderstanding, that all client contracts are with the company, not individual representatives. Matteo laughed. I told him to check his paperwork again. I smiled, feeling a wave of validation, and did he must have? He got very quiet, then said he'd have to get back to me. Matteo opened his sample box. Enough about that. Let me show you what we've been working on. By noon, I'd confirmed meetings with 5 more clients for the following day. By 3, I'd received emails from 7 others, all reporting similar calls from either Preston or another executive at my former company. At 4, Sylvia called. They're threatening legal action, she said without preamble, claiming breach of contract, client poaching, and misappropriation of trade secrets. Exactly as Eleanor predicted, I replied. Yes, and exactly as we prepared for that. I've reviewed all the documentation again. The client transfers were executed properly with full disclosure to and consent from each client. You never signed a non-compete clause, and there are no trade secrets involved, since all client information was either publicly available or provided directly by the clients themselves. So, we're on solid ground. Absolutely. But they don't know that yet. They're bluffing, hoping you'll panic. What's our next move? Let them bluster. I've requested all relevant documentation from their legal team. That will buy us some time while they scramble to find paperwork that doesn't exist. After hanging up, I crossed to the window, watching boats navigate the harbor. Eleanor had loved this view when we looked at this office space together just weeks before her death. She'd stood in this exact spot. Remember Roland, she'd said, when they realize what's happening, they'll try to intimidate you first. When that fails, they'll try to buy you. And when that fails, she'd turn to me, her face gaunt, but her eyes still fierce. That's when they'll show you exactly who they are. My phone buzzed with a text from an unfamiliar number. Roland, it's Julian. Can we talk? Not company business. Just talk. Julian, the one who'd gotten the promotion I deserved. We'd never been close, but he'd always been less overtly political than the others. Still, I hesitated before replying. When and where? His response came quickly. Tonight, that cafe near your old apartment? I frowned. How did he know where I used to live? I'd moved 6 months ago and had never mentioned my new address at work. The Copper Kettle at 7, I replied, naming a cafe in a busy shopping district instead. I arrived early, choosing a table with a clear view of both the entrance and the back exit. Julian walked in at exactly 7, scanning the room until he spotted me. He looked tired, the usual confidence in his stride missing. Thanks for meeting me, he said, sliding into the chair opposite mine. What's this about, Julian? He ordered coffee before speaking again. Things are crazy at the office. The executive team is in complete meltdown mode, and that concerns me. How? They're saying you stole clients, that you and Eleanor conspired to defraud the company. He leaned forward. They're building a case against you. There is no case. They've pulled 5 years of emails looking for evidence. They're interviewing everyone who worked with you, asking if you ever discussed taking clients. I kept my expression neutral again. Why should I care? Julian. Look, I know we weren't friends, but what they're doing, it's not right. They're trying to destroy you professionally. Why are you telling me this? He stared into his coffee for a long moment, because Eleanor once did something similar for me. Warned me when they were setting me up to fail. This was unexpected. Julian had always seemed like one of them, ambitious, political, willing to play the game. I owe her, he continued, and by extension, you. What exactly are they planning? They're contacting every client claiming you misrepresented your authority to transfer the accounts. They're offering steep discounts to maintain relationships. and they're preparing to send cease and desist letters to all 23 businesses. I nodded slowly. Anything else? They've frozen Eleanor's final compensation package, claiming evidence of misconduct. They're using it as leverage with her family. This sent a surge of anger through me. Eleanor's sister had 2 children in college. That money was meant for them. Thank you for telling me, I said finally. Julian hesitated. There's one more thing. They've offered me a bonus, a significant one, to provide evidence against you, and will you? There isn't any evidence to provide. He stood to leave. I never saw this meeting happening, neither did you. After he left, I sat alone, processing this new information. They were more desperate than I'd anticipated. Targeting Eleanor's family crossed a line I hadn't expected even them to cross. I called Sylvia again. They're freezing Eleanor's final compensation, I said when she answered. I just heard from her sister's attorney, Sylvia confirmed. They're claiming evidence of breach of fiduciary duty. Can they do that? They can try, it won't hold up. But it could tie up the funds for months. That's exactly what they want. Her sister needs that money now. I know, I'm working on it. I ended the call and headed home, my mind racing. This wasn't just about me anymore. They were punishing Eleanor's family to get to me. The knowledge sat like a stone in my stomach. The next morning, I received an email from the CEO himself, requesting a private meeting to resolve our differences amicably. I forwarded it to Sylvia without responding. Her reply was swift. They're getting desperate. The legal threats aren't working. So now they're trying diplomacy. Stick to the plan. The plan. Eleanor's plan. Now mine. A careful sequence of events designed to give me maximum leverage when the time came. We were still in the early stages, but already the company was reacting exactly as she'd predicted. By the end of the week, all 23 clients had confirmed they were staying with me. My phone had been blocked from receiving calls from the company's main numbers, and Sylvia was handling all legal communication. The initial panic had faded, replaced by a steady determination. I spent my days meeting with clients, setting up proper workspace, and establishing the foundation of my new business. Evenings were devoted to strategic planning. I slept better than I had in years. Then came the first real complication. Fiona called on Friday afternoon, her voice tight with stress. Roland, we have a situation. Your former employer is telling our investors that our contract transfer was illegitimate. They're claiming it could invalidate our entire financing round. My grip on the phone tightened. That's completely false. I know that, but our lead investor is spooked. They're talking about pulling out unless this gets resolved. Fiona's startup had just secured crucial second-round funding. Losing that would be devastating. Give me your investor's contact information, I said. I'll have Sylvia reach out directly. There's more, Fiona continued. They've offered to cut our service fees by 40% if we come back. That's hard to ignore in our position. This was the first crack in the wall. If Fiona went back, others might follow. I understand, I said carefully. That's a significant discount, but we don't want to leave you, she added quickly. You and Eleanor have been there from the beginning. We trust you. Let me see what I can do, I promised. After hanging up, I paced my small office. This was an escalation. I hadn't fully prepared for that. They were targeting the most vulnerable clients first, the startups with investor pressure and tight budgets. I called Sylvia again, explaining the situation. They're playing hardball, she agreed, but so can we. How? I can't match a 40% discount. I don't have the resources they do. No, but you have something they don't. I could hear the smile in her voice. You have Eleanor's contingency plan, I think. The next morning, I invited Fiona to my office. When she arrived, Sylvia was already there along with a man I'd never met. Tall, silver-haired, with the confident bearing of someone used to being in charge. Fiona, this is Reginald Fowler, I said, Eleanor's former mentor and the founder of her first investment group. Fiona's eyes widened. Reginald Fowler was something of a legend in startup circles, an early investor in dozens of now successful companies. Miss DeSwaney, he said, extending his hand. Eleanor spoke highly of your innovation. Mr. Tanner, she stammered. I had no idea you were involved with Roland's company. I wasn't until yesterday, he replied, glancing at me. But Eleanor asked me to keep an eye on certain situations that might arise after her passing. Your current predicament qualifies. For the next hour, Reginald outlined a potential partnership. that would not only resolve Fiona's immediate investor concerns, but potentially accelerate her company's growth timeline. By the time she left, the crisis had transformed into an opportunity. "Thank you," I said to Reginald after Fiona had gone. "Eleanor never mentioned she'd spoken to you about this." Eleanor kept many cards close to her chest. He replied, "She contacted me shortly before her death, explained what she was planning for you, and asked if I'd be willing to step in if certain situations arose, and you agreed just like that." Reginald's expression softened. "Eleanor saved my company 20 years ago when everyone else had written me off. I owed her that. Besides," he added, with a small smile, "I've been watching those executives mismanage talent for years. It's about time someone taught them a lesson." In the end, justice was served. I built my own empire, leaving Preston and the corrupt executives to rot in their cells. The legacy of Eleanor lived on through my success. We won.